In this episode, we're going to look at my NPC dialogue system and how I completely underestimated how complicated it would be. As a professional creative, I've been using 3ds Max for a very long time. And whilst the UK can't afford to hire anyone, I'm filling my days as a solo indie game dev. Recently, I've released Combat Search Rescue on the MetaQuest, and now I'm prototyping a game for release on Steam. Welcome back to my devlog. I've had a busy couple of weeks since the last video. Daria, my partner, she's got a new contract, so I'm getting up at 5:30 every morning to drive her to the site to make sure she gets there on time. So that's clouded my mind a little bit. I spent a week porting Combat Search Rescue to itch.io, so that can be played on flat screen now, so you don't need a VR headset. And I then spent a week working on my NPC dialogue system. So let's take a look at that. And we are in the map, which we can select using left and right. Incidentally, I've set this up to be localized. Obviously, I've not translated it yet. And inside the Sea of Plenty is where my NPCs are hiding at the moment. Okay, when you get close to the NPC, it shows you what button to press to make contact. Now, if I was using the keyboard, it shows me the letter to press. And if I was using a PlayStation controller or a generic controller, it would show me the letter for that as well. It's all set up. And then you press Y and the speech bubble appears. This house looks like a boat. It is a boat. You see, I'm a fisherman and I live on my fishing boat. What fish can you catch in a desert? None, but this isn't a desert. This is the ocean. Where's all the water? They've stolen it. And my artwork's placeholder is hilarious. It's really basic. I wanted to see if I could do rigging in Blender, so I needed a really basic character, so I knocked that up in a minute or two. So then you go to the next NPC. You sell fish bones? Indeed, they make good combs. Sadly, I don't have any money. I'll tell you what, if the water comes back, you can have them all. And then the dialogue's over. And they don't show it twice, it's all done. Now, let's go back to the main menu here. And go to a new version of the game. The storyline is given out in a particular order, so it doesn't matter which of these NPCs I visit first. I'll always get the first part of the story distributed to them. So that was really important to make sure my narrative is delivered in the correct order. So they tell this first part of the story and I can walk away and the speech bubble times out and let's talk with this guy. You sell fish bones now, yeah? And if I come back here, nice house, looks like a boat. And if I walk away, and then come back, it restarts the conversation because it was getting confusing if you were switching between NPCs and the conversations were resetting. And then the last important thing is once they've finished the conversation, you can't come back to it again. So you know that you've completed all the narrative, you're not missing any. And if this symbol appears, you know you haven't done this one yet. So now that I've got an NPC dialogue system, I'm very happy because I now can fill my game with the narrative that will support my narrative-led small open world game. So I can see it's going to be easy. I know scriptable objects everywhere in this game. I wonder what people did without them. But even scriptable objects are not the answer, are they? They are really clunky and complicated to use, and they're just going to litter my project with files everywhere. What else can I tell you? I hate the speech bubble. Really, really hate the speech bubble. In fact, I hate all speech bubbles. I am using a speech bubble because I can't afford to record voice acting. And because I've localized it as well, I will definitely won't be able to afford to employ people to voice act all the localization. So written text it is, and speech bubbles is the trope that is used for that, isn't it? Now, speech bubbles were invented before I was even born. They were in comics to show which person was speaking. But it's just really just a frame in my game, just to hold the text, give it a clear background so you've got the nice contrast to see the letters clearly. It may change. I really don't like it, but we're not doing graphics at this stage. We're working on the system. I think the other reason I don't like the speech bubble is because I used to be a motion graphics artist. I used to do Avid DS, which in my opinion is the world's best video editing, color grading and motion graphics system there has ever been. And that doesn't exist anymore because they squashed the development. I used to do After Effects, and I don't pay for Adobe anymore, so to Adobe. So yeah, and doing motion graphics in Unity is just really clunky and horrible. I'm sure there must be an easier way. I haven't discovered it, but like I said, we're not doing graphics yet. We are working on the systems. So let's have a look at this in some detail. So the first thing I did was I made the player detect the NPC. Now I could have used a trigger, but I didn't want it to be there every frame because this game's going to get really slow if everything's running on every frame. So I made this system called distributed updates. It's a class that has a timer and it's going to trigger things that need to happen regular. So instead of putting them in the update, I am going to trigger events using distributed updates, like once every second or whatever I end up doing once I start tweaking the values later. So once the player detects the NPC used to hold the dialogue and the player would just walk up, trigger the dialogue and the dialogue would pop up. Then we added the localization table, which allows it to show all these different languages. So we've got Spanish, we've got French, we've got German, and all these other languages. And at some point, when I've finished the narrative and the dialogue, I will get it all translated. But it's there, waiting. Localization works, just waiting to be translated. Then I offloaded these references to the localization tables to scriptable objects here. And the reason I did that was because I have localization, and localization uses addressables, and I'm using addressables in the object pool system. So I thought I might as well have all the dialogue in scriptable objects. So I developed that, which kind of makes it a little bit easier to work with, although scriptable objects are horrible things. I can see that they've solved a programming problem, but they haven't really solved the user interface problem. They look awful. I know you can modify Unity's user interface, but it's beyond my scripting abilities, so I will not even be touching that. In the scriptable object, I added this Boolean, so you can swap sides. So let's have a look at that. The player can stand on either side, and their picture appears on the side that's relative. And then I added the ability so the photos can flip over like that, depending on which side they're on, which was harder than I expected because it wasn't using game objects, they're using sprites and the flip is in a different place. So getting the reference to that in code took me a while to find out what that reference was. I'm still learning C#, remember? So no, but I got there in the end. Then the next thing that became the complicated part was I needed to be able to present my narrative in the correct order despite which NPC the player visits first. I don't want the narrative to be out of order because it may not make sense. I haven't written all the narrative yet, but I wanted to make sure that the narrative comes out in the right order. They are assigned their storylines via this enum. So this one's called Desert Fishing. The first NPC to be visited gets the first part of the desert fishing narrative. The second NPC gets the second part of the desert fishing, blah, 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 and so on. And I can add as many of these different storylines as I want and assign them to which NPCs have them. or which collection of NPCs have them. So that took me a while to get. I had to make a dialogue manager that stores the ID. Every player and every NPC has a unique GUID, basically. So when it goes to the save system, it gets stored, and I can then, if they get removed from the game, they can be removed from the save file, and we know which one that is because it'll have a GUID. So this GUID is stored in a dictionary with the enum that stores the narrative, which in this case is desert fishing, and also which line of dialogue they are talking about. The next thing I added was these independent buttons. When your player walks up to the NPC, depending on which input device they're using, it shows the Y for the Xbox, so they talk, or on the keyboard it's the letter C. And also, I don't have a PlayStation controller or any other controller to test it with, but I've set it up that it should show the correct button for PlayStation controllers, Steam controllers, and so on. Can't test them yet, but I'm sure someone's going to test them in the future. Then it's possible to walk away from the NPC before the dialogue has finished. So I needed a way for the speech bubble to time out and disappear, so it's reset for when the player visits the next NPC. So that I added, and I had moved the control away from the NPC. The NPC used to control the speech bubble and say speech bubble open. Now I've moved that across to the system that distributes my dialogue, so that takes control. Architecture is always the thing that I don't really understand how to do in programming, because I'm learning programming still. I'm learning obviously commands that you can use, for instance dictionaries, lists, how to make methods, blah blah blah, all of that. I am learning all the extra things along the way, so I've learned enums and structs and switches, and there's all sorts of other things that I'm still learning that I don't even know that I don't know. And architecture is not anything that gets taught early on. I think you've got to learn everything about C# before you even touch upon architecture. So I'm inventing architecture and then reinventing it and then reinventing it. So once I'd finally fixed my speech bubble being controlled by my dialogue system, and my dialogue system knew that it would that the person had walked away, I then got into a mess with the conversations, because you could walk away from the NPC 1 without finishing the conversation, and when you came back it would pick up from where you left off, and it didn't make sense, especially being presented in that same speech bubble, because it would confuse you. So what I had to do is I had to reset the dialogue. If you walked away without finishing, the dialogue has to be reset back to the 0, so when you get there you read it. And my writing, even this is a little bit long, but what I want to do is only use minimal amounts of writing to tell the story. So I'll write the story and then just chop, 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 and just keep hacking it down, so I'm using the minimal amount of text that I can. I don't want to present walls of texts in a game, and I don't want to have to pay to translate it all either. So minimal text, minimal cost for translation later on. So yeah, but you get back to the NPC, conversation restarts, so you can actually get a clear understanding of that part of the story. And I've chosen at this stage not to be able to go back and repeat conversations. I don't want. There's games that you play where you go back and you meet the same character, and they're going, I see, there's a stranger is in town. It's like, no, we've already met. I don't want that. So no repeat conversations. Once you get to the end, it ticks it, it's done, and that one will never be delivered to the player again. So it all works. What I'm still short of is a quest manager to manage things like who you pick up keys from and the quests that the NPCs give you. Now, I think that's going to be easy. I think that's just going to be a dictionary that stores the name of the quest and then at which part of the quest we're on, whether it's unactivated, activated, or complete. I think that's all the quest system needs. The complication is the NPCs have got to trigger the quests. So although the quest system will be simple, I think my NPC system is going to get a lot more difficult. And what I've realized doing this is possibly in every game I've ever played, the NPCs are probably the most complicated part of any game. Because obviously putting in environments, making them environments do stuff, that's fairly straightforward. That's just graphics and triggers. But NPCs, there's all sorts of systems that are going to stack on top. They're going to have nav mesh applied so they can move around. Oh, that was another thing I did on this NPC as well. I had to add them to my saving system. And as I was doing that, I thought, my original idea was that no NPC could leave their chunk. So just like the trees, that the NPCs would be stored with the chunk. And then I remembered I've got a couple of games for my narrative where you've got to collect things that the NPC needs. But they're NPCs, you've got to round them up. And I was thinking, it's going to be a bit rubbish if they're all on that one chunk that you can see. I want to be able to spread them through these giant levels I've created. So I needed my save system to be able to allow NPCs to leave their chunk. So they do raycasts, find out what chunk they're in, and they tell the chunk, I'm on you, and the chunk manager manages the saving of the NPC. I got into a bit of a mess with that because when they left the chunk, it wasn't resetting the lists. It's always the lists. I keep forgetting to reset them, or they're not getting reset properly. And when they were moving to the next chunk of the world, they weren't getting saved on that and they were disappearing, or they were getting saved on that, not getting erased from the original. So when you came back to the level load, when you loaded that level again, you'd have two NPCs. And oh man, that took days to solve, days. And I was really tired because I'd been getting up earlier. And so yeah, I wasn't enjoying the NPC saving system. Luckily, the NPC system works now for saving, so I can drag this NPC over to this tile, for instance. And then when I exit and say, let's come back in, you can see that the NPC is where I left it. So I'm happy that's kind of all working, but I think the NPCs are going to be harder than the object pool was in my last game. Like I said before in an earlier video, the object pool was the thing I kept coming back to having to change in my last game because I'd written my own object pool and it's like, oh, it doesn't do this, and I've got to make it sure it does this, and it's not resetting this properly. And I think my NPC system is going to be that in this game. Yeah, I had no idea that NPCs were so difficult. I thought it would just be, you walk up, you press a button, the NPC triggers a little script that does something, and that was that. And it hadn't even occurred to me that there was all this other complexity behind the scenes. So that's where we're up to. I'm happy, really happy with where we're up to. As long as I can keep making progress like this, I'm going to end up with a game that works, and everything, by the time I get towards the end, it's just going to be graphics and tweaking performance, and then just relying on the systems I've made. Also, once it's all finished, I'm going to have a system I can reuse. So once the genre I choose to begin with, if it's popular, or if the game's popular, I can change the genre, change all the graphics, keep the systems, and then release another one and have like a series of them. So that's kind of my thinking behind all this system, why it's like this. But obviously, you never know, do you? I looked at itch.io and the amount of crap on there has astonished me. I mean, I'm not pretending that I'm the best game developer in the world, but Combat Search Rescue makes a lot of that stuff on itch just look like, I don't know, like people are spending a day making it and uploading it. And to my detriment, the itch.io, it's been up there 2 weeks nearly, and it hasn't been indexed. They haven't accepted my taxation documents, and the instructions in the FAQ say this is going to happen within an hour, so don't panic if it doesn't appear straight away. It hasn't appeared for 2 weeks. So they must be inundated with this crap. And I think people are using AI to make this shite. I really do. I think they're jumping on Unity or Godot or Unreal Engine and going, I don't know what I'm doing. Going to AI, going, do this for me, making something rubbish, and then going, haha, look at how clever I am, here's my AI. And that's no way to be. It's definitely not somewhere I want to be, relying on AI, because you're only one algorithm change or a pricing change that prices you out of that game, and then you're back to being nobody again. So for me, I'm going to do it the hard way. I'm going to continue learning C# and learning Unity and struggling my way through until I have finished game number 2, and I'm happy with it. If you want to check out my itch.io port of Combat Search Rescue, here is the URL. It's not in the index, like I said, so you won't find it if you search for it. So yes, you can play it in the browser, the full Combat Search Rescue game, the full one that's in the MetaQuest headset, except it's not in VR. It's going to just be flat screen, and you don't get to control where you look. The computer does, depending on where you are on the screen. It's a little bit harder on flat screen because you don't have the advantage of stereoscopy viewing in VR, where you can see the depth. So there are layers to this. There's foreground, midground, and background, and you play in the midground. So when the asteroids and mines come in the foreground, it can be a bit tricky to work out what layer they're on, but I think that just kind of adds to it. I am not going to change it. So it's playable in the browser. Please enjoy it. And if you want to support me, you can pay $4 and download it. That's up to you, but you don't have to. Thanks again for watching. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to write an ending again.